On May 21, 1981, the entire island of Jamaica came to a complete standstill to bury its most famous son, Bob Marley. The National Arena in Kingston was packed to the absolute limit with politicians, international celebrities, and tens of thousands of crying, heartbroken fans. It was a massive state funeral, a grand spectacle broadcast around the world, complete with eulogies from prime ministers and an overwhelming display of national mourning. But standing in the middle of this enormous, weeping crowd was one man whose face showed absolutely no sorrow. Instead, his expression was twisted in deep, burning, undeniable anger. That man was Peter Tosh. He was Bob Marley's closest friend, his original musical brother, and the vital co-founder of the Wailers. But on the very day Bob was laid to rest, Peter Tosh was not there to mourn quietly or shed a tear for the cameras. He was furious, and his deep rage was directed at the people sitting in the front row, the global music industry, and even members of Bob's own inner circle. To understand why Peter Tosh was so deeply angry at this funeral, you have to look past the beautiful music and the global fame that everyone knows. You have to look into a dark, hidden history of brutal betrayal, stolen money, extreme political hypocrisy, and a deep, agonizing feeling that the world was being sold a massive lie. The tension between these men and the world around them had been building for years, but this grand funeral was the ultimate breaking point for Peter. As Peter Tosh looked around the national arena that day, he saw the highest-ranking politicians in Jamaica sitting proudly in the places of honor. These were the exact same government officials and leaders who, for decades, had violently oppressed Rastafarians. These were the men who had ordered the armed police to brutally beat, arrest, and harass young men in the ghettos simply for growing dreadlocks and practicing their faith. For years, the brutal system in Jamaica had treated men like Peter and Bob as dangerous criminals. The government had aggressively banned their early, raw music from the radio, claiming it was rebellious and threatening to polite society. Now, suddenly, because Bob Marley had become a massive global superstar and brought incredible wealth and international attention to the island, these exact same politicians were standing at his coffin, wiping away fake tears and calling him a national hero. For a man like Peter Tosh, who was famous across Jamaica for his uncompromising, brutal honesty, this was absolutely disgusting to witness. He saw the entire state funeral as a massive, hypocritical circus. He felt with every fiber of his being that the corrupt government was hijacking his brother's death to make themselves look good to the rest of the world. Peter knew the real, starving struggles they had faced together in the violent ghetto of Trench Town, and seeing the very people who created that daily struggle now acting like Bob's best friends made his blood boil. But the anger Peter held went much deeper than just his hatred for the politicians. The true root of Peter Tosh's rage went all the way back to the very beginning of the Wailers. Most people today are taught a very specific version of history. They think of Bob Marley as a solo genius who single-handedly created reggae music and brought it to the world. But Peter knew that was a carefully crafted industry myth, a lie designed to sell records. In the beginning, in the dusty yards of Trench Town, there was no Bob Marley and his backing band. There were only the Wailers, a tight, unbreakable trio consisting of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer. In those early days, they were absolute equals in every single way. In fact, when they first started trying to make music, Peter Tosh was the only one in the group who actually knew how to play any instruments. Peter was the one who patiently sat down and taught Bob how to play the guitar. Peter was the raw musical backbone and the toughest voice of the group. They suffered together, they starved together, they slept on cold floors together, and they built the very foundation of reggae music from the ground up in the most violent streets of Kingston. They made a solemn blood pact that they would rise out of the ghetto together, as one unbreakable unit. Everything they knew changed the moment they signed a contract with Island Records and met a man named Chris Blackwell. Blackwell was an incredibly smart, wealthy British-Jamaican record producer, and he knew exactly how to market and sell reggae music to the massive, wealthy white rock and roll audiences in America and Europe. But Blackwell did not want a group of equal, militant, terrifying Rastafarians. He knew that wouldn't sell to the mainstream. He wanted one clear, safe, good-looking frontman that he could control and market. He chose Bob. Immediately behind the scenes, the record label started strategically pushing Peter and Bunny into the shadows. Without even having the respect to tell Peter and Bunny to their faces, the label completely changed the name of the group on their international album covers from the Wailers to Bob Marley and the Wailers. When Peter Tosh found out about this name change, he was absolutely enraged. He felt his entire life's work, his blood, and his sweat were being stolen right out of his hands by a corporate executive. He felt that Blackwell was acting like a modern-day plantation owner, taking the raw, brilliant talent of the Jamaican youth, dividing them against each other, and taking all the profits for himself. Peter did not stay quiet about this. He desperately warned Bob about what was happening. He sat Bob down and told him that the music industry was deliberately trying to separate them so they could control the music and the money. He begged Bob to stand strong with him and Bunny against the record label, to demand they be treated as the equals they always were. But Bob, perhaps seeing the massive global opportunity and the chance to finally escape poverty forever, went along with Blackwell's plan. This singular decision created a deep, painful, and permanent crack in their lifelong friendship. Peter felt entirely betrayed by the man he considered his closest brother. He had to stand back and watch helplessly as Bob became a global superstar, the sole face of a massive musical movement they had built together with their bare hands, while Peter was pushed out, left fighting for basic recognition and basic survival. Peter felt that the true, gritty history of the band was being deliberately erased by executives in London and New York, and that a massive lie was being sold to the world for years. This deep bitterness extended incredibly heavily into the financial side of their history. Peter Tosh was incredibly, rightfully angry about the money. During their desperate early days in Kingston, the Wailers signed terrible, exploitative contracts, mostly because they were starving and desperate just to get their voices heard on a record. As the songs they painstakingly wrote and arranged together started making millions of dollars globally, Peter realized with horror that he was barely seeing a tiny fraction of that wealth. Even massive hit songs that Peter had a direct hand in creating, writing, and structuring were credited solely to Bob Marley or to the publishing companies owned by the record label. The financial disputes between them were ugly, drawn out, and deeply personal. Peter felt that the people constantly surrounding Bob, the fast-talking managers, the international promoters, and even members of Bob's own family and inner circle, were getting filthy rich off the foundation that he, Peter Tosh, had built. At the funeral, Peter was forced to stand in the crowd and look at these exact same wealthy music executives and managers. They were the ones wearing the expensive black suits, acting as the official, self-appointed guardians of the Wailers' legacy, crying for the cameras. Meanwhile, Peter, the man who actually created the sound, was treated almost like an unwanted outsider at his own brother's burial. The heavy tension in the air also heavily involved Rita Marley and the tight inner circle that surrounded Bob in his final, fading years. Peter Tosh was always a very harsh, vocal critic of the people who gained influence and power over Bob as he got sicker. When Bob tragically passed away without leaving a legal will, it immediately created a massive, chaotic, and ugly legal fight over his estate, which was now worth millions upon millions of dollars. Peter watched from the outside as high-paid lawyers, estranged family members, and shady business associates scrambled like vultures to take total control of Bob's money, his image, and his incredibly valuable music catalog. To Peter, this scramble for cash was the ultimate, final disrespect. It proved everything he had always violently preached about the greedy, wicked nature of the people who attached themselves to Bob once he became a famous millionaire.